Welcome to Stats. We're going to look a little bit more at uh, implementing or designing a experiment. There's another video where I started this discussion, and here is a continuation of that same video. We're going to focus a little bit more on just the overall design of a experiment or study in various forms here. This is mainly focused on the idea of an experiment rather than an observational study because of one big idea, namely that we're going to be talking about how to introduce a treatment into a study, see if the treatment has an effect upon the outcome. Now, a couple things we need to look at is how we build the system, so to speak. How do we split everything up, and then also how do we compare our results when we're done? One of the things that we want to make sure that we're clear with is I'm actually back up this slide here. Is this idea of randomized comparative experiment. It's the idea that we are setting up a random way of assigning people to the group. So we're not necessarily picking out and saying, oh, I know these 5 people will do well in this group and these 5 people will do well in that group, and splitting the groups up that way. That defeats the whole purpose of doing this study to a large degree. The idea is that we're actually randomly picking subjects to go into the 2 groups or more sometimes, and we'll talk about that as well. But the treatments themselves are assigned, and sometimes we randomize who or which group gets the treatment. So we might randomly assign 50 people into 2 groups, and then we randomly assign one of the 2 groups to get the standard treatment and one to get the sham treatment, and we'll talk momentarily about that. The standard treatment would be we're designing some type of process of some sort that maybe we want to see if this has an effect upon or improves the quality of education in, say, a math class. So we take in that situation, randomizing the students themselves might be difficult, but let's just say that we're going to take 50 students from a 8th grade group, and we're going to randomly select half of those students into group 1 and half the students into group 2, and then we're going to assign one group to be the standard group and one group to get the sham treatment. And we'll talk about what that means. So the idea being is that I say 2 control groups. That's actually kind of mislabeled there. We have 2 groups. And instead of having a control group in the traditional sense where nothing different is done in the space, we do a sham treatment, which allows us to be able to eliminate some confounding variables. So the idea being is that we really want to know this methodology of ABC, how it affects the outcomes of learning a particular mathematics in that classroom. And then we tell the other group that we're also the group that's not getting the actual treatment. We tell them we're doing this other method. And there may not really be anything different that we're doing. We may just be telling them there's something different that we're doing. And what this does is it eliminates the idea of a couple different things. And I've actually played around with this in my own classrooms over the years of teaching high school, of telling my students, oh, I'm going to try something new this semester. And we're going to see if it works. And if it doesn't work, we're going to throw it out. But if it does work, I'm going to keep using it. So I'm going to try this out on y'all, and I'm going to want feedback from you. What it did was it allowed students to buy into the idea, oh, look, he's wanting to try something new with us. He's wanting us to be successful. He cares about us, so we're going to try harder. All right. Now, there were years where I actually did try to do something new, and there were other years where I'd actually just kind of repeated what I did last semester, and I just wanted to see if it worked again. So it was kind of new in the regard of it was still something I was playing around with, but it wasn't new from the perspective of I hadn't done it before. It was something I had done in a previous semester, and it worked previous semester, and I continued to do that. But the students thought it was a brand new activity that no one had ever done before, and they got really excited about doing it because they thought it was new. And lo and behold, the group did really well on the activity because they got excited about it. So the idea behind the sham treatment is this idea that, well, if we get rid of this confounding variable, that there might be, that something else could be affecting the outcome here. We think we're doing something different, so we're going to be doing something different, of course, is the idea of how this can actually be occurring. It allows us to eliminate that confounding variable of saying, okay, so the method really didn't have an effect. It was just the students got excited, or look, both groups were equally excited about the outcome. One group legitimately did better. So it just gives us another additional layer of control over being able to compare the two outcomes. So the design about this is group one might get another idea here is that we might actually design two different treatments. As opposed to maintaining one as control and one as the treatment, we might actually design two different treatments. So we have method method ABC, and maybe we have method 1, 2, 3, and we're trying them out in two different math classrooms on the exact same topic to see which one has the higher effect upon the students. So in this case, it's not a sham activity or a sham treatment, it's an actual treatment. It's just two different treatments to see which one has the higher effect. And what this does is it does actually eliminate that confounding variable for us to a degree, because in both instances we're able to tell the students we're trying something new out. Now, this isn't confined just to the educational world. That's just where almost all of my research is centered around. So that's my area of expertise in that. This does have its places in medical sciences, in other behavioral studies as well. So keep that in mind. You can design it that way, different ways. Now, another way we can do this is we can also create three groups where we have treatment 1, treatment 2, and then a control group. And of course, you can expand on this if you wanted to and design all sorts of different ways. You could have treatment 1, treatment 2, control group, and the sham group. And just you telling one group that you're doing something different, but you're not really doing anything different. You have a group and you're saying, we're just going to be doing the same thing that's always been done. And then you have two different treatments. And like you think in terms of medical aspects, we could say what we're going to do is we're going to give this group 1, this particular new drug, and group 2 is going to get this other new drug. Group 3 is going to do absolutely nothing different, and group 4 is going to get a placebo. And the idea behind placebo is it is a drug, it's a fake drug. It does absolutely nothing to your system. I think at one point in time it used to be a sugar pill. I'm not sure what it is anymore, because it seems like a little bit of sugar would probably not be a good thing. But it was it's just a pill that dissolves into your system and just has no effect whatsoever upon your body. It's an inert. So you could have 4 groups. In that case, you could actually have 2 control groups, one group that knew they were a control group and one group that thought they were getting a treatment. And you could compare to see what's happening within those groups as well. So there's a lot of different ways you can approach going about this. Okay. So another aspect of this is this idea of the control group and how you assign individuals into that control group, the randomization, if you will, of how you go about doing that. You're not always going to be in a situation where you can pick out who's going to be in what group, but a lot of times with randomization, we're trying to randomize which groups or which individuals or which subjects are in that control group and which ones are not in that. And then another idea of this is we want to try to maintain a level of replication in the design we create. So we want to be able to create a study and document the study in such a way that someone else can come along and repeat our exact same study and hopefully get the same outcomes that we got. So the replication of the study itself lends to the research being more significant or more reliable or more robust. And those are all different aspects of those are not 3 words that are synonymous with each other. Those are different aspects of the study itself. The one we're going to look at right now is significance, statistically significant. And I'm purposely not putting a number with this, but the idea is that the observed effect is so large that the outcome that we're talking about, or the outcome that we show, or the results that we have in front of us, disengage us from being able to say that this was a random event, okay, or that happened by chance. There is a very clear-cut correlation between the event and the treatment, and that allows us to be able to say that this is statistically significant, as opposed to saying like there seems to be a little bit of a trend here that could have been done by chance. So we want to create a big enough database, collect enough data that allows us to be able to say this is, of course, definitely significant. Now the thing is that can vary a lot. The value that we're talking about can vary quite a bit based upon a number of different factors. One might be the population you're dealing with. Another one might be the actual treatment itself. Uh, in some instances, let's just say that you're trying out a new cancer drug, and you find in your treatment group that the 10 people you gave this experimental drug to who were before the treatment was given were considered to be terminally ill patients, and then they were all cured. Well, that even at 10 people, you're talking about it being statistically significant because the outcome was so dramatic. So the size of the population isn't necessarily the only factor. The other side of that is you might have another drug. And this is, again, this is very true. You might have a drug and you've given this drug to thousands and thousands of people, and you showed that the majority of the people, let's say 55% of the people, showed an improvement, a good improvement in whatever this drug was supposed to be treating, element B, right? And but we can't necessarily say it's significantly or statistically significant, even with say 1,000 or 1,500 people having received the drug, because the division between those who saw success and those who didn't is still not great enough. And that word great enough is in quotes there, because that can vary a lot based upon the statistics that you're running. By and large, when you get to roughly the 2,000 mark, the 3,000 mark in a population or in your sample, you're starting to get into the realm where it doesn't really matter. The outcome is going to be statistically significant, assuming there is actually a difference between the treatment and the control, right? So when you get to 3,000 samples compiled and you show that there's no difference between the treatment and the control group, you know whatever this treatment is non-effective, right? But if you get a small percentage difference between those, you are actually getting to a place where you can start to say there is some impact this drug is having. There's some impact this methodology in the classroom is having upon this outcome, albeit very small. Okay, so the bigger the difference in the between the treatment and the control group, the less of the population needs to be. But even at 10. If you have a huge dramatic difference, even at 10, you can still make an argument that's not necessarily statistically significant yet, although the effect is enormous. We need to collect more data so we can add that significance to the data piece of that, because it looks like it's going in a good direction. All right. So another aspect of studies, something called double blind. I'm sure many of us have heard this, but not everybody necessarily knows what it is, although it's a very straightforward concept. The idea with the double blind study is that neither the researchers nor the subjects involved in the study know which group is which. So you might have group A and group B. One group's receiving the treatment, one group is the control group, and nothing's happening different to them. And those two groups don't know which group they are. Now, how you do this in education, what you do is you would have to approach it from the same perspective of saying, okay, so we're going to just be doing this as a normal classroom, nothing different, and you'd have to say that in both classrooms. But as soon as you start actually doing things, people might start to notice that this is a little different than the other classroom, if they have any knowledge of what it should look like. So that might be kind of difficult to do in a social setting like a classroom. Drugs are exceedingly easy to do double-blind studies because you can always give an individual a placebo and make them believe that they're doing something different. So there's that piece, right? And then there's other ways you can build that. Now, all these studies have one major flaw in them almost all the time because of this situation. It's called a lack of realism. And the idea being is that the actual study itself is not really reproducible outside of the confines of the study. So this is maybe a bit of a stretch in the lack of realism, but there was a company that was producing a statin drug. And statins are drugs that were designed to reduce cholesterol levels in the bloodstream. And some of these statins legitimately reduce cholesterol, and some of these statins do not. One company actually did a study, and they actually had multiple groups. They had more than two groups. They had the control group where they got the placebo. They had the treatment 1 where the individuals received the statin drug. They had treatment 2 where the individuals ate oatmeal. and this treatment 3 where they received the statin drug and ate oatmeal. And that was the difference between, so I guess it's 4 groups there. And what they found was the oatmeal group had a massive difference in blood cholesterol reduction. And then they said, well, the people who had just the statin drug saw very little reduction, but they did see some reduction. But the people who saw the greatest reduction were the people who took the statin drug and ate the oatmeal. And this is a real study. This is not a made-up study. And they, of course, the company said, so people should be taking our drug and eating oatmeal. That's the best way to reduce your cholesterol levels is to eat oatmeal and take our drug. The lack of realism in that aspect is that oatmeal is something that everybody can do very effectively. But the issue was taking the drug itself. No one's really going to fall into that realm of, well, I can do one of these 2 things. Actually, I guess that would be a better scenario for statistically significant, because what they found was there wasn't a statistically significant difference between eating just oatmeal and taking the statin drug and eating the oatmeal. So the lack of realism in that particular instance is this idea that it's unrealistic for you to need the drug. Another situation is a place where, like in a classroom, where you have all the resources you could possibly ever want and need, and everything's introduced, and instead of 1 teacher for 25 students, you have 3 teachers for 25 students. In the United States, that's an unrealistic expectation. You say, well, it worked though. And he's like, yes, it very much did work, but it's not realistic. It's not going to be something that's going to be useful to us because we can't reproduce it. So there's that. All right. Block design. You are all very familiar with block design, even though you may not realize it. So block design is the idea that a group is kind of engineered to occur. So we have a group that possesses a particular characteristics, and we know this. We think maybe that this particular characteristic is going to affect a particular outcome. Now, inside the block, people are randomly assigned to a control group or a treatment group, but the block itself is predetermined. And a really solid example of this is based on gender. You have a school building, maybe you just split individuals by male and female. And the idea being is that you know that the social interactions between those 2 groups is different. So if you split the groups right down the line into the 2 groups, you do see a significant outcome difference for both groups. And even with the way that social things are in our country right now, this is actually still very much true. A lot of people don't want to realize this or accept this, but it is a very true fact that when you do this, and multiple studies have shown that when you split children by gender, you split them into the males and the females, biologically, you end up with better outcomes for both groups. So that would be a block design. Now, one of the things you could do inside that, and actually had an individual I knew who did a study like this, where they took the middle school, they took 1 grade in the middle school, and they split them by male and female. And then inside the males and inside the females, they actually tried out different methodologies in random groups. They randomized a classroom, and they legitimately randomized some classrooms in both sides. And they tried out different methodologies with different groups because they wanted to see, was one methodology better for females versus males? And what they found is, yes, there were actually differences. There were times when one educational method was better for boys, and one method was better for girls. You think that everybody needs the same thing across the board, separate but equal, and it's not even true according to gender. Different people need different methodologies to help them be successful, and the classrooms looked very, very different. Now, the problem with that was that there were individuals who were very upset that they were split like that. They thought it was inappropriate, and some of it may even go back to the lack of realism, because they're like saying, in the real world, you're not going to deal with a situation where people are separated like that. And that's true, but you also, in the real world, you don't have instances where people are separated by age either. In a job setting, you don't say, oh, those are the old people over there, we don't work with them. Those are the young people over there, we don't work with them. Those are the middle-aged people over there, we don't work with them. That's not the way jobs are set up, but that is the way we set up our schools. And in a lot of businesses, we self-select ourselves into subgroups in those businesses. So that's actually something that can also be looked at and studied as well, as we try to institute this realism into how we set up our school systems, but it's not technically how our world is actually set up. So it's very interesting to look at these different pieces. Keep in mind that none of this is passing judgment. This is not politically based or religiously based. These are just mathematical outcomes that we can look at and see that there's a pretty big difference between these events. So keep that in mind when you look at research and you're thinking about design. It's about trying to randomize. It's about trying to create a process by which we can pull out truths and ideas, not necessarily get all of it out at one time, but to kind of tease out this piece and that piece to have a better understanding of those interactions. And when we approach this from a perspective of wanting to become more enlightened about that topic, as opposed to trying to prove a point, we end up in a place where we start to actually learn more. I hope this is useful, and if you need additional comments or explanations or further discussion about any of this, please reach out and let me know. Take care.